Dylan's Radio Theater presents two short stories. I'm your host, Craig K. Dillon. The first story is Tabermory by Saki. A drawing room gathering is unsettled when a house cat reveals an unexpected intelligence. The second is The Last Leaf by O. Henry. Set among struggling artists in New York City, the story turns on illness, hope, and an act of quiet devotion. Two stories by different authors offering very different insights into the human condition. We begin with Tabermory. It was a chill, rain-washed afternoon in the late August day, that indefinite season when partridges are still in the insecurity or cold storage, and there's nothing to hunt, unless one is bounded on the north by the Bristol Channel, in which case one may lawfully gallop after fat red stags. Lady Remley's house party was not bounded on the north by the Bristol Channel, since there was a full gathering of her house guests around the tea table on this particular afternoon. And in spite of the blankness of the season and the triteness of the occasion, there was no trace in the company of the fatigued restlessness which means a dread of the pianola and a subdued hankering for auction bridge. The undisguised, open-mouthed attention of the entire party was fixed on the homely, negative personality of Mr. Cornelius Appin. Of all our guests, he was the one who had come to Lady Brumley with the vaguest reputation. Someone had said he was clever, and he had gotten his invitation in the moderate expectation on the part of his hostess that some portion at least of his cleverness would be contributed to the general entertainment. Until tea time that day, she had been unable to discover in what direction, if any, his cleverness lay. He was neither a wit, nor a croquet champion, or a hypnotic force, nor a begetter of amateur theatricals. Neither did his exterior suggest the sort of a man in whom women are willing to pardon a generous measure of mental deficiency. He had subsided into mere Mr. Appin, and the Cornelius seemed a piece of transparent baptismal fluff. Now he was claiming to have launched on the world a discovery beside which the invention of gunpowder, of the printing press, and of steam locomotion were inconsiderable trifles. Since science had made bewildering strides in many directions during recent decades, but this thing seemed to belong to the domain of miracle rather than to scientific achievement. And do you really ask us to believe, Sir Wilfrid was saying, that you have discovered a means for instructing animals in the art of human speech, and that dear old Tabermory has proved your successful pupil? It is a problem at which I have worked for the last 17 years, said Mr. Appin, but only during the last 8 or 9 months have I been rewarded with the glimmering of success. Of course, I have experimented with thousands of animals, but latterly only the cats, those wonderful creatures who have assimilated themselves so marvelously with our civilization while retaining all their highly developed feral instincts. Here and there among cats, one comes across an astounding superior intellect, just as one does among the ruck of human beings, and when I made the acquaintance of Tabermory a week ago, I saw at once that I was in contact with a beyond cat of extraordinary intelligence. I'd gone far along the road to success in recent experiments. With Tabermory, as you call him, I have reached the goal. Mr. Appin concluded his remarkable statement in a voice which he strove to divest of a triumphal inflection. No one said rats, though Clovis' lips moved in monosyllabic contortion, which probably invoked those rodents of disbelief. And do you mean to say, asked Miss Resker, after a slight pause, that you have taught Tabermory to say and understand easy sentences of one syllable? My dear Resker, said the wonder worker impatiently, one teaches little children and savages of backward adults in that piecemeal fashion. When one has once solved the problem of making a beginning with an animal of highly developed intelligence, one has no need for those halting methods. Tabermory can speak our language with perfect correctness. This time Clovis very distinctly said, beyond rats. Sir Wilfrid was more polite, but equally skeptical. Hadn't we better have the cat in and judge for ourselves, suggested Lady Brumley. So Wilfrid went in search of the animal, and the company settled themselves down to the languid expectation of witnessing some more or less adroit drawing-room ventriloquism. In a minute, Sir Wilfrid was back in the room. His face was white beneath its tan, and his eyes dilated with excitement. By God, it's true! His agitation was unmistakably genuine, and his hearers started forward in a thrill of awakened interest. Collapsing into an armchair, he continued breathlessly. I had found him dozing in the smoking room, and I called out to him to come for tea. He blinked at me in his usual way, and I said, "Come on, Toby, don't keep us waiting." And by God, he drawled out in a most horribly natural voice that had come when he was dashed well pleased. I merely jumped out of my skin. Appin had preached to absolutely incredulous hearers, so Wilford's statements carried instant conviction. A Babel-like chorus of startled exclamation arose, amid which the scientist sat mutely, enjoying the first fruit of his stupendous discovery. In the midst of the clamor, Tabermory entered the room and made his way with velvet tread and studied unconcerned across the group seated around the tea table. A sudden hush of awkwardness and constraint fell on the company. Somehow, there seemed an element of embarrassment in addressing on equal terms a domestic cat of acknowledged mental ability. "Will you have some milk, Tabermory?" asked Lady Blumley in a rather strained voice. "I don't mind if I do," was the response, couched in a tone of even indifference. A shiver of suppressed excitement went through the listeners, and Lady Blumley might be excused for pouring out the saucerful of milk rather unsteadily. I'm afraid I spilt a good deal of it," she said apologetically. "After all, it's not my Axminster," was Tobermory's rejoinder. Another silence fell on the group when then Miss Resker, in her best district visitor manner, asked if the human language had been difficult to learn. Tabermory looked squarely at her for a moment and then fixed his gaze serenely in the middle distance. It was obvious that boring questions lay outside of his scheme of life. "What do you think of human intelligence?" asked Miss Pellington lamely. "Of whose intelligence in particular?" asked Tobermory coldly. Well, mine, for instance," said Mavis with a feeble laugh. "You put me in an embarrassing position," said Tabermory, whose tone and attitude certainly did not suggest a shred of embarrassment. "When your inclusion in this house party was suggested, so Wilford protested that you were the most brainless woman of his acquaintance, and that there was a wide distinction between hospitality and the care of the feeble-minded. Lady Blumley replied that your lack of brain power was the precise quality which had earned you your invitation, as you were the only person who could think of who might be idiotic enough to buy their old car. You know that one they call the envy of Sisyphus? Because it goes quite quietly, nicely uphill if you push it." Lady Blumley's protestations would have had greater effect if she had not casually suggested to Mavis only that morning that the car in question would be just the thing for her down at her Devonshire home. Major Firefield plunged in heavily to effect a diversion. "How about carryings on with the tortoise shell puss up the stables, eh?" The moment he said that, it was everyone realized the blunder. "One does not usually discuss these matters in public," said Tobermory frigidly. "From a slight observation of your ways since I've been in the house, I should imagine you'd find it inconvenient if I were to shift the conversation to your own little affairs." The panic of which ensued was not confined to the Major. "Would you like to go and see if the cook has your dinner ready?" suggested Lady Blumley hurriedly, affecting to ignore the fact that it wanted at least 2 hours to Tobermory's dinner time. "Thanks," said Tobermory. "Not quite so soon after my tea. I don't want to die of indigestion." "Cats have 9 lives, you know," said Wilford heartily. "Possibly," answered Tabermory, "but I only have 1 liver." "Adelaide," said Mrs. Cornett, "do you mean to encourage that cat to go out and gossip about us in the servants' hall?" The panic had indeed become general. A narrow, ornamental balustrade ran in front of most of the bedroom windows in the towers, and it was recalled with dismay that this had formed a favorite promenade for Tabermory at all hours, whence he could watch the pigeons and heaven knows what else besides. If he intended to become reminiscent in this present outspoken strain of the effect would be something more than disconcerting. Mrs. Cornett, who spent much time at her toilet table, and whose complexion was reputed to be of nomadic, though punctual disposition, looked as ill at ease as the major. Miss Scrowan, who wrote fiercely sensuous poetry and led a blameless life, merely displayed irritation. If you are methodical and virtuous in private, you don't necessarily want everyone to know it. Bertie Van Tan, who was so depraved at 17 that he had long ago given up trying to be any worse, turned a dull shade of gardenia white, but he did not commit the error of dashing out of the room like Ode Finsbury, a young gentleman who had understood to be reading for the church and who was possibly disturbed at the thought of scandals he might hear concerning other people. Clovis had the presence of mind to maintain a composed exterior privately. He was calculating how long it would take to procure a box of fancy mice through the agency of the Exchange and Mart as a species of hush money. Even in a delicate situation like the present, Agnes Resker could not endure to remain too long in the background. "Why did I ever come down here?" she asked dramatically. Tabermory immediately accepted the opening. "Judging by what you said to Mrs. Garnett in the croquet lawn yesterday, you were out for food. You described the Brumleys as the dullest people to stay with that you knew, but said that they were clever enough to employ a first-rate cook. Otherwise, you'd find it difficult to get anyone to come down a second time." "There's not a word of truth in it. I appeal to Mrs. Cornett," exclaimed all the discomfited Agnes. "Miss Cornett repeated your remark afterwards to Bertie Van Tan," continued Tobermory, "and said, 'That woman is a regular hunger marcher. She'd go anywhere for 4 square meals a day.' And Bertie Van Tan said." At this point, the chronicle mercifully ceased. Tobermory had caught a glimpse of the big yellow Tom from the rectory, working his way through the shrubbery towards the stable wing. In a flash, he had vanished through the opening of a French window. With the disappearance of his too brilliant pupil, Cornelius Appin found himself beset by a hurricane of bitter upbraiding, anxious inquiry, and frightened entreaty. The responsibility for the situation lay with him. He must prevent matters from becoming worse. Could Tobermory impart his dangerous gift to other cats? Was this the first question he had to answer? It was possible, he replied, that he might have initiated his intimate friend, the stable puss, into a new accomplishment, but it was unlikely that his teaching could have taken a wider range as yet. "Then," said Mrs. Cornett, "Tobermory must be a valuable cat and a great pet, but I'm sure you'll agree, Adelaide, that both he and the stable cat must be done away with without delay." "You don't suppose I've enjoyed the last quarter of an hour, do you?" said Lady Blemley bitterly. "My husband and I are very fond of Tobermory. At least we were before this horrible accomplishment was infused into him. But now, of course, the only thing is to have him destroyed as soon as possible." "We can put some strychnine in the scraps he always gets at dinner time," said Sir Wilfrid. I'll go drown the stable cat myself. The coachman will be very sore at losing his pet. But I'll say a very catching form of mange has broken out in both cats, and we're afraid of it spreading into the kennels." "But my great discovery," expostulated Mr. Appin. "After all my years of research and experiment." "You can go and experiment on shorthorns on a farm who are under proper control, or the elephants at the zoological gardens. They're said to be highly intelligent. They have this recommendation that they don't come creeping about our bedrooms and under chairs and so forth." An archangel ecstatically proclaiming the millennium, and then finding that it clashed unpardonably with Henley, would have to be indefinitely postponed, could hardly have felt more crestfallen than Cornelius Appin at the reception of his wonderful achievement. Public opinion, however, was against him. In fact, had the general voice been consulted on the subject, it is probable that a strong minority vote would have been in favor of including him in the strychnine diet. Defective train arrangements and a nervous desire to see matters brought to a finish prevented an immediate dispersal of the party. But dinner that evening was not a social success. So Wilfrid had rather a trying time with the stable cat and subsequently with the coachman. Agnes Resker ostentatiously limited her repast to a morsel of dry toast, when she bit as though it were a personal enemy, while Mavis Pellington maintained a vindictive silence throughout the meal. Lady Blemley kept up a flow of what she had hoped was conversation, but her attention was fixed on the doorway. A plate full of carefully dosed fish scraps was readiness on the sideboard, but sweets and savory and desserts went their way, and no Tabermory appeared either in the dining room or kitchen. The sepulchre dinner was cheerful compared to the subsequent vigil in the smoking room. Eating and drinking had at least supplied a distraction and cloak to the prevailing embarrassment. Bridge was out of the question in the general tension of nerves and tempers, and after Odo Finsbury had given a lugubrious rendering of Melisande in the Wood to a frigid audience, music was tacitly avoided. At 11, the servants went to bed, announcing that the small window in the pantry had been left open as usual for Tobermory's private use. The guests read steadily through their current batch of magazines and fell back gradually on the badminton library and bound volumes of Punch. Lady Bremley had made periodic visits to the pantry, returning each time with an expression of listless depression which forestalled questioning. At 2:00, Clovis broke the dominating silence. He won't turn up tonight. He probably in the local newspaper office at the present moment dictating the first installment of his reminiscences. Lady What's-Her-Name's book won't be in it. It will be the event of the day. Having made this contribution to the general cheerfulness, Clovis went to bed. At long intervals, the various members of the house party followed his example. The servants taking round the early tea made a uniform announcement in reply to a uniform question. Tobermory had not returned. Breakfast was, if anything, a more unpleasant function than dinner had been, but before its conclusion, the situation was relieved. Tobermory's corpse was brought in from the shrubbery, where a gardener had just discovered it. From the bites in his throat, the yellow fur which coated its claws, it was evident that he had fallen in unequal combat with a big Tom from the rectory. By midday, most of the guests had quitted the towers, and after lunch, Lady Blemley had sufficiently recovered her spirits to write an extremely nasty letter to the rectory about the loss of her valuable pet. Tobermory had been Appin's one successful pupil, and he was destined to have no successor. A few weeks later, an elephant in Dresden Zoological Garden, which had shown no previous sign of irritability, broke loose and killed an Englishman who had apparently been teasing it. The victim's name was variously reported in the papers as Open or Eppelin, but his front name was faithfully rendered Cornelius. If he was trying German irregular verbs on the poor beast, he deserved all he got, said Clovis. The Last Leaf by O. Henry. In a little district west of Washington Square, the streets have run crazy and broken themselves into small strips called places. These places make strange angles and curves. One street crosses itself a time or two. An artist once discovered a valuable possibility in this street. Suppose a collector with a bill for paints, paper, and canvas should, in traversing this route, suddenly meet himself coming back without having a cent having been paid on account. So to the quaint old Greenwich village, the art people soon came prowling, hunting for north windows and 18th century gables and Dutch attics and low rents. Then they imported some pewter mugs and a chafing dish or two from 6th Avenue and became a colony. At the top of a squatty 3-story brick, Sue and Johnsy had their studio. Johnsy was a familiar for Joanna, one from Maine and the other from California. They had met at the table d'hote of 8th Street Delmonico's and found their taste in art, chicory, salad, and bishop sleeves so congenial that the joint studio they resulted. That was in May. In November, a cold, unseen stranger whom the doctors called pneumonia stalked about the colony, touching one here and one there with his icy fingers. Over on the east side, this ravager strode boldly, smiting his victims by the scores. But his feet tread slowly through the maze of the narrow and moss-grown places. Mr. Pneumonia was not what you would call a chivalric old gentleman, a mite of a little woman and blood thinned by California zephyrs was hardly fair game for this red-fisted, short-breathed old duffer. But Johnsy he smote, and she lay scarcely moving on her painted iron bedstead, looking through the small Dutch window panes at the blank side of the next brick house. One morning, the busy doctor invited Sue into the hallway with his shaggy gray eyebrow. She has one chance in, let us say, 10, he said as he shook down the mercury in his clinical thermometer. And that chance for her to want to live. This way, people have a lining on the inside of the undertakers, make the entire pharmacopoeia look silly. Your little lady has made up her mind that she's not going to get well. Has she anything on her mind? She wanted to paint the Bay of Naples someday, she said, Sue. Paint? Bosh. Has she anything on her mind worth thinking twice? A man, for instance? A man, said Sue. Is a man worth, but no, doctor, there's nothing of the kind. Well, it is the weakness then, said the doctor. I will do all that science so far as it may filter through my efforts can accomplish. But whenever my patient begins to count the carriages in her funeral procession, I subtract 50% from the curative power of medicines. If you will get her to ask one question about the new winter styles in cloak sleeves, I will promise you 1 in 5 chance for her, instead of 1 in 10. After the doctor had gone, Sue went into the workroom and cried a Japanese napkin to a pulp. Then she swaggered into John Z's room with her drawing board, whistling ragtime. John Z lay, scarcely making a ripple under the bedclothes, with her face toward the window. Sue stopped whistling, thinking she was asleep. She arranged her board and began a pen and ink drawing to illustrate a magazine story. Young artists must pave their way to art by drawing pictures for magazine stories that young authors write to pave their way to literature. As Sue was sketching a pair of elegant horseshoe riding trousers and a monocle of a figure of the hero, an Idaho cowboy, she heard low sound, several times repeated. She went quickly to the bedside. Johnsie's eyes were wide open. She looked out the window and counting backward. 12, she said. A little later, 11. Then 10. And 9. Then 8. And 7, almost together. Sue looked solicitously out of the window. What was there to count? There was only a dreary bare yard to see, and the blank side of a brick house 20 feet away. An old ivy vine, gnarled and decayed at the roots, climbed halfway up the brick wall. The cold breath of autumn had stricken its leaves from the vine until its skeleton branches clung, almost bare to the crumbling bricks. What is it, dear? She said. 6, said Johnsy in almost a whisper. They're falling faster now. 3 days ago there was almost 100. Made my head ache to count them, but now it's easy. There goes another one. There are only 5 now. 5 what, dear? Tell Sooty. Leaves on the vine. When the last one falls, I must go too. I've known that for 3 days. Didn't the doctor tell you? Oh, I never heard of such nonsense, complained Sue with magnificent scorn. What has old ivy leaves to do with you getting well? And you used to love that vine so, you naughty girl. Don't be goosey. Why, the doctor told me this morning that your chances for getting well real soon were exactly what he said. He said the chances were 10 to 1. Why, that's almost as good as chances we have in New York when we ride on the streetcars or walk past a new building. Try to take some broth now and let Sooty go back to her drawing so she can sell the editor man with it and buy port wine for her sick child and pork chops for her greedy self. You needn't get any more wine, said Johnsy, keeping her eyes fixed out the window. There goes another one. No, I don't want any broth. That leaves just 4. And I want to see that last one fall before it gets dark. Then I'll go too. Jonesy, dear, said Sue, bending over her, will you promise me to keep your eyes closed and not look out the window until I am done working? I must hand these drawings in by tomorrow. I need the light or I would draw the shade down. Couldn't you draw in the other room? Asked Johnsy coldly. I'd rather be here with you. Besides, I don't want you to keep looking at those silly leaves. Tell me as soon as you finish, said Johnsy, closing her eyes and lying white and still as a fallen statue, because I want to see the last one fall. I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of thinking. I want to turn loose my hold on everything and go sailing down, just like one of those poor, tired leaves. Try to sleep, said Sue. I must call Behrman up to be my model for the old hermit miner. I'll not be gone a minute. Don't try to move till I come back. Old Behrman was a painter who lived on the ground floor beneath him. He was past 60 and had a Michelangelo's Moses beard curling down from the head of a satyr along with the body of an imp. Behrman was a failure in art. 40 years he had wielded the brush without getting in near enough to touch the hem of his mistress's robe. He had always been about to paint a masterpiece, but he had never done it yet. For several years he had painted nothing except now and then a daub in the line of commerce of advertising. He earned a little by serving as a model to those young artists in the colony who could not pay the price of a professional. He drank gin to excess and still talked of his coming masterpiece. For the rest, he was a fierce little old man who scoffed terribly at softness in anyone, and who regarded himself as a special mastiff in waiting to protect the two young artists in the studio above. Sue found Behrman smelling strongly of juniper berries in his dimly lit den below. In one corner was a blank canvas on an easel that had been waiting there for 25 years to receive the first line of his masterpiece. She told him of Johnsy's fancy and how she feared would indeed light fragile as a leaf for herself float away with her slight hold upon the world grow weaker. Old Behrman, with his red eyes plainly streaming, shouting his contempt and derision for such idiotic imaginings. "Was," he cried, "is there people in the world mit their foolishness to die because leaves they drop off from a confounded vine? I have not heard such thing. No, I will not bose 'em as a model for you fool hermit Dunderhead. Why do you allow that silly business come to der brain of her? Ach, that poor little Miss Jonesy." "She is very ill and weak," said Sue, "and the fever has left her mind morbid and full of strange fancies." "Very well, Mr. Behrman. If you do not care to pose for me, you needn't. But I think you are a horrid old flibbertigibbet." "You are just like a woman," yelled Behrman. Who said I will not pose? Go on, I come at you. For half an hour I've been trying to say I'm ready to pose. God, this is not any place in which one so good as Miss Jonesy shall lie sick. Some day I will paint the masterpiece, and ye shall all go away. God, yes. Jonesy was sleeping when they went upstairs. Sue pulled the shade down to the windowsill and motioned Behrman into the other room. And there they peered out the window fearfully at the ivy vine. Then they looked at each other for a moment without speaking. A persistent cold rain was falling, mingling with the snow. Behrman, in his old blue shirt, took his seat as the hermit miner of an upturned kettle for a rock. When Sue woke from an hour's sleep the next morning, she found Jonesy with the dull, wide-open eyes peering at the drawn green shade. "Pull it up. I want to see," she ordered in a whisper. Wearily, Sue obeyed. But lo, after the beating rain and fierce gusts of wind that had endured through the livelong night, there stood out against the brick wall one ivy leaf. It was the last one on the vine, still dark green near its stem, with its serrated edge tinted with the yellow of dissolution and decay. It hung bravely from the branch some 20 feet above the ground. "It is the last one," said Jonesy. "I thought it was surely fall during the night. I heard the wind. It will fall today, and I shall die in the same time." "Dear, dear," said Sue, leaning her worn face down the pillow. "Think of me. If you won't think of yourself, what would I do?" But Jonesy did not answer. The lonesomest thing in the world is a soul when it is making ready to go on its mysterious far journey. The fancies seemed to possess her more strongly as one by one the ties that bound her to friendship to earth were loosed. The day wore away. Even in the twilight they could see the lone ivy leaf clinging to its stem against the wall. And then, with the coming of the night, the north wind was again loosed, while the rain still beat against the windows and pattered down from the low Dutch caves. When it was light enough, Jonesy the merciless commanded that the shade be raised. The ivy leaf was still there. Jonesy lay for some time looking at it, and then she called to Sue, who was stirring her chicken broth over the gas stove. "I've been a bad girl, Sudie," said Jonesy. "Something has made that last leaf stay there to show me how wicked I was. It is a sin to want to die. You may bring me a little broth now and some milk with a little port in it. And no, bring me a hand mirror first and then pack some pillows about me. I will sit up and watch you cook." An hour later, she said, Sudi, someday I hope to paint the Bay of Naples. Doctor came in the afternoon, and Sue had an excuse to go into the hallway as he left. Even Shanta, said the doctor, taking Sue's thin, shaking hand in his hand, with good nursing you'll win. Now I must see another case I have downstairs. Behrman, his name is. Some kind of artist, I believe. Pneumonia, too. He's an old, weak man, and the attack is acute. There's no hope for him, but he goes to the hospital today to be made more comfortable. Next day, the doctor said to Sue, she's out of danger. You won. Nutrition and care. Now that's all. And that afternoon, Sue came to the bed where Johnsy lay, contentedly knitting a very blue and very useless woolen shoulder scarf, and put one arm around her pillows and all. I have something to tell you, White Mouse, she said. Mr. Tabermory died of pneumonia today at the hospital. He was ill only 2 days. The janitor found him in the morning of the first day in his room downstairs, helpless with pain. His shoes and clothing were wet and through and icy. They couldn't imagine where he had been on such a dreadful night. Then they found a lantern still lighted, and a ladder that had been dragged from its place in some scattered brushes, and a palette with a green and yellow colors mixed on it. And look out the window, dear, at the last leaf on the ivy wall. Did you remember why it never fluttered or moved when the wind blew? Ah, darling, it's Behrman's masterpiece. He painted it there, the night that the last leaf fell. Dillon's Radio Theater is produced and narrated by Craig K. Dillon. Author's notes. Saki. Saki was the pen name of H. Munro, a British writer active in the early 20th century. He was best known for stories that combined satire, wit, and sudden reversals, often set within the polite drawing rooms of Edwardian England. Saki's stories were widely published in newspapers and magazines, and his work was popular with contemporary readers for its sharp observation of manners, hypocrisy, and social pretense. Though often humorous on the surface, his stories frequently carry darker undercurrents beneath their controlled style. Munro's writing career was cut short when he was killed during the First World War in 1916 at the age of 45. His short fiction remains in print and continues to be read. O. Henry. O. Henry was one of the most important and influential short story writers in American history. Writing at the turn of the 20th century, he published hundreds of stories and reached an exceptionally wide readership. O. Henry was known for stories that focused on ordinary people facing quiet moments of decision, sacrifice, or reversal. Although he never received a major literary award during his lifetime, the O. Henry Award was established after his death and named in his honor. It remains one of the most respected recognitions of short fiction. His work continues to be widely read and adapted.